So now we're going to talk about Confucius, Mencius, and Xunzi. I guess I should qualify it to say I have no particular skill in pronouncing the names correctly, so I would not take my pronunciation as a particular kind of model, but it's one way to pronounce this. So we're talking about Confucius and Confucianism. Confucius, his dates, as far as we know, are quite a long time before people like Socrates or even the pre-Socratics. He was like 551 to 479, which is like maybe 100 years before those guys. His main work was the Analects, but he didn't write it. Rather, he had his followers, and they wrote down his sayings in the Analects in almost like it seems like a pretty random order. Like it doesn't start out like saying this is the start. It just goes straight into kind of a bunch of sayings, and it's not really ever clear if there's any particular order to them. His family name was Kong. His personal name was Xunzi. So he got to be known when he was a famous philosopher as the Master King, which is Confucius. And the Latinization of that, the European version, became Confucius. So first we're going to go over like some of the basic ideas, and then we'll go into it in a little more detail. Then we'll talk a little bit about Mencius and then Xunzi. So he was writing at a time when there was a great deal of unrest, a great deal of war, and he wanted his philosophy to be useful. So his main aim was to try and restore social stability, trying to kind of make the world a more peaceful place, or at least make his area a more peaceful place. So he was interested in how to do that, how to get like a stable society. And so he provided, we might call it a system of social and ethical philosophy. He made a lot of different points, and subsequent interpreters have sort of made it into a system. If you read the Analects, it's not like he's setting out a whole big philosophy. He's making a bunch of comments, and commentators on his comments have then kind of systematized it. In some ways, one of his central ideas is that you need to look at the family, and you need to have families behaving well. And when families are behaving well, then society will be more peaceful. So he has several central concepts, but the ones we're going to focus on are Li and Ren. So there's a very kind of simple contrast between Li and Ren. Li is like outward behavior. It's to do with going through the rituals, obeying the laws, respecting the institutions of society. Whereas Ren is like your inner mind, your inner emotions, and it's to do with things like being kind, wanting to help the world, loving people, treating people like humans. So there's the outward aspect and then the inner aspect. So Li is about kind of basically obeying social rules. That can include the laws, but it's much more general than that. It's about the rituals, going through the ceremonies, and even etiquette, like just behaving in a polite manner to other people. So he thinks, in some way, he thinks those sorts of appearances, those sorts of outward behavior are very important. And it's not just, he thinks it's not just that you have to behave in the right way, but you actually have to have the right sort of attitude. You have to kind of believe in your role. You have to accept it, not just because like that's the way to get by, but more than that, you kind of have to sort of accept that those are the rules of your society, and you agree with them. And he thinks that will lead to universal harmony. So he thinks kind of going along with the regulations is good for society. And he also, I mean, there's a very idealistic aspect to it. He thinks that if everybody is behaving well, then you wouldn't even need laws. You wouldn't even need police or judges or anything like that, because everybody would just be nice to each other. I mean, it's hard to imagine a society which hasn't had some kind of laws and some kind of way to enforce those laws, and some kind of punishments. But Confucius's idea is ideally we would not need to punish anybody ever, because everybody would be behaving well. That kind of idea we'll see again when we come to Mencius. So this idea of Ren and how the sort of obligations between people. So there's a very central idea in Chinese culture and Chinese philosophy, and certainly Confucianism, about, it's called filial piety. It's the way that children show respect to their parents. So there's an expectation that children should show respect, maybe especially to the father, but also to the mother. And for Confucius, in some ways, he thinks all of morality can be seen as sort of extension of that kind of respect to the elders. So it's a two-way street. It's not just that the child has to respect the elder also has to behave well to the child. There is a mutual responsibility, but certainly it's asymmetrical. So there's the father-child relationship. Clearly, the father is in charge and the child should be respectful. There's the ruler-subject relationship, like the emperor has the whole of society, and the whole of society should do what the emperor says. There's the husband-wife. It's a patriarchal society, so the wife should follow the rules of the husband. But also remember that in all cases, the father, the ruler, the husband should always be doing what's good for the other person in the relationship and for society generally. So the idea, being selfish is definitely not what's meant to be happening there. Then there's elder brother, younger brother. And that seems certainly in older cultures, it's been important that the eldest son has basically been the most important child, and the other children are meant to respect the eldest son. It gets a bit more complicated if the eldest child is a woman. And in patriarchal societies, you still look to the eldest son. But there's the idea that the younger children, the younger brothers, should be respecting the elder brother. maybe that's not an idea that we have so much these days, although I think you still hear it in today's society. You know, if somebody is the eldest child, they feel like they are the one with the most responsibility. Then there's kind of friend. I think there's a room for discussion there about whether that's more equal or whether it's to do with if there's an age difference, then the younger friend has to respect the older friend. So those are kind of the basic ideas. Just to say, go into Confucianism in a little more detail. And one thing I'd say is, although there's many elements to Confucianism, the basic ideas are not either very complicated and they're not very hard to understand. They're pretty simple ideas. So you can contrast Confucianism with Taoism. Taoism is a much more kind of freewheeling approach, while Confucianism puts a lot of emphasis on ritual and following ritualism and following law. Taoism is much more about being authentic to yourself and being spontaneous, and is much less interested in the kind of just following rules. And then there are these other kind of philosophical schools in the classical age, which have been important. We're not going to talk about them here. Chinese philosophy went on to the medieval age, and there was plenty of development of Confucianism and Taoism and Buddhism and interactions between them. And then there was the kind of modern age, ironically being like from the 11th century, so like kind of 1,000 years ago. But there were developments of new forms of Confucianism. There was Neo-Confucianism, which incorporated Taoist and Buddhist elements. And then in the 20th century, there's been quite a lot of impact of Western philosophy on Confucianism. And it's also worth pointing out that Confucianism and Chinese philosophy generally started to have more of an impact on Western philosophy. Confucius said he was very respectful of the ancient philosophers who were ancient to him, and he said he wasn't really inventing anything new. He was just collecting together the ideas that were already in other books. And so they are like the Book of Changes, the Book of History, the Book of Odes, the Book of Rites, and the Spring and Autumn Annals. He definitely says that the ancient philosophers were the ones who had the greatest wisdom, and he is kind of channeling them. He was from the ancient state of Lu over there in eastern China, and he was born there, and he spent most of his life there. Confucianism originated in China, but it spread, as I've already mentioned, to other areas. It especially spread to Korea and Japan over the centuries. So we've talked about Confucius. We're going to talk about Mencius. And then there's Xunzi, who was active 298 to 238. Then there was the Han Dynasty, and there were other Confucian philosophers later on. So certainly it's a tradition with many philosophers, many interpretations, although there are themes running through Confucianism, there are all sorts of variations. You get in the Middle Ages, you get the Tang Dynasty, the Sung Dynasty, the Ming Dynasty, and so it keeps on going. mostly in Confucius's work, he's not very big on metaphysics. He talks about heaven a little bit. Um, but in some ways, the kind of central idea is the Tao, the way. Uh, the idea that the Tao obviously is used in Taoism, but it's also used in Confucianism. And it's a rather vague idea, but the idea is like there's some kind of underlying reality, some underlying authority governing everything. There's another idea that plays a role in Confucianism, the familiar idea of yin and yang, the sort of dual expression of this Tao, and the complementary, neither one rules. And there's a sort of general idea that the world is kind of, there's the plurality of the world. The world is variable. We could talk about that as the plural world. In terms of theology, there's sort of interesting kind of ideas of theology, which play some role for Confucius. There's the idea of Shang-Ti, the God, or at least so the God is not like a sort of supreme being, but it's more like a original ancestor, an important ancestor. There's the idea of heaven as a divine realm. So the kind of there is this idea that you can go on and live in heaven and live in Shang-Ti as ancestors, but not everybody gets to do that. So there's a kind of exchange between earth and heaven. Certainly people on earth make offerings to the divine realm. They make prayers, and hopefully heaven will be kind of nice to people on earth. They will grant wishes. They will make life easier. So that kind of idea, you see that in many religions, the idea that you pray, you make offerings, and the divine powers will look kindly on you. So there's this idea, you have to worship the ancestors, you make sacrifices, and they're going to guide and protect us. Then there's also this idea that if you die, you hope to join the ancestors in heaven. And there's also an extra idea of kind of spirits. There can be good spirits and evil spirits. The view set out by Confucius is not kind of materialistic. It's not monistic. It's like the idea that there's all sorts of parts of the world that you have to be aware of. Now, while some religions can pay a lot of attention to the afterlife, it seems like the Chinese view wasn't really very focused on the afterlife. There is this idea that if you live well, if you live with the mandate of heaven, if you're a good person, then you can become an ancestor in heaven. There's also an idea that if you don't behave well, if you're not following the rules, then you may go on to life in some kind of underworld area, the Yellow Springs. Doesn't sound so great. And then you just fade into nothingness. So there is, eventually Chinese religion did sort of adopt some idea of hell, but not in the time of Confucianism. And Buddhists and Taoists were sort of more sympathetic to the idea of heaven and hell. The Confucians just not really, they weren't really very interested in like those aspects of the world beyond the everyday realities. They were interested in how to make society more peaceful, now, and they weren't interested in kind of some afterlife. So there's this idea that you're trying to achieve kind of harmony on earth, achieve a good social order. Certainly, there's ideas of aesthetics, of valuing art. We're not really going to talk about that. We're going to be talking more about the morality. And the morality leads to his view of how society should be run. So there's a close link between those two. He thinks basically that well, we should be aiming towards an ideal. I know that that's true just about every moral approach. You set out some ideal for people to aim for. And so that they have the idea of Xunzi, that's the kind of superior, virtuous, perfected person. So that person has ideal yi, ren, li, of all the virtues. So yi, we haven't talked about yi so far. It's kind of righteousness, just and appropriate control, and so it's a kind of idea of justice. We have talked about the idea of ren, which is the idea of feeling empathy, compassion, love for all humanity. So certainly the Confucians argued for those ideas, and they thought that that kind of ren, this kind of good moral feelings, caring for others, being respectful for others, is really very important. The idea of ren is sometimes translated as humanity. And then we talked about the idea of li, the kind of behaving well. So there's some elements of that. There's the rectification of names, which is using language well. So language, maybe to us, language seems more secondary, but the Confucians thought the correct use of language is very important. There's the idea of the doctrine of the mean, which is a kind of a life of moderation. That's also an idea you see in Taoism. And it's an idea that you also see in Aristotle. So it's a very common idea that you should avoid extremes. You should kind of go the middle way. And as we've already seen, there's this idea of the 5 constant relationships: parent, child, husband, wife, elder sibling, younger sibling, elder friend, younger friend, ruler, subject. Those are like the main relationships in society. As I mentioned, like this idea of filial piety is really central to Taoism and is part of Li. So it's this idea that you should have kind of, it's not just like doing what your parents tell you. It's like having a devotion and reverence for your parents and your family. So this kind of central idea of Confucianism is that the family is just central to morality. It's sort of striking, actually, that how big an idea that is. And in some ways, I think it's an idea we find very reasonable. Most of us, I think that family is incredibly important morally. When you get to moral theory in the West, it's amazing to find there's almost no mention of family. So one thing that's very striking about Confucianism and attractive about it is how much attention it pays to family morality. Although we might not necessarily agree that children should always be so respectful to their parents. You might say, well, sometimes your parents are wrong. That's not really an idea that you see in Confucianism. There's this really strong emphasis on this idea of respect for age. Confucianism also says you need to follow the rituals of your religion. You need to worship the god and the ancestors. You need to kind of be aware of the spirits. You need to go through the funeral services. You need to make sacrifices in honor of your parents. So the outward, this outward behavior is extremely important. He thinks it's important for the harmony of society. And there's this idea of when, kind of emphasis on both learning and the arts. He thinks that's extremely important for a good society. He places quite a lot of emphasis on music. We don't really have a lot. Obviously, one thing that's very hard to survive from the ancient times is music. Most ancient civilizations had music. We only have a fairly bare idea of exactly what their music was like, but for them, as for us, music was very important. And Confucius even composed a book of music, which is some people think to be very important. Now, Confucius was clearly not a Democrat. He didn't believe in democracy. He believed in the idea that society should be ruled by a ruler. Some you might call that ruler an emperor. But the emperor is kind of sort of employed by society. So the emperor is meant to rule for the good of society. He thinks it's definitely a bad idea for emperors to be selfish. He thinks that emperors should be morally good people. They should be rational, and they should act with moderation. So they're aiming for what's good for society. So that is basically, like I said, Confucian philosophy, although there are some different elements to it, it all makes a fair amount of sense and is pretty intuitive, let's say. Now we can move on to Mencius. Mencius probably did not know Confucius, but he was certainly a follower of his ideas. He lived maybe 100 years after Confucius. The main thing about Mencius is that he has a theory of human nature, and his theory is that people are basically good. But in some ways, it's a kind of a fairly happy view he has. And wouldn't it be nice to think that people are basically good? Everybody in society is basically wishing everybody else well. It's not necessarily a view that we find easy to accept these days, but it is an optimistic view. So we might see it as somewhat idealistic, a little bit kind of, if you're cynical, you might say, well, Mencius is a bit divorced from reality. He thinks that if somebody does something bad, you shouldn't punish them. Rather, you should just explain to them what they did wrong, and then they will understand. So that's reminiscent of Socrates' view that all bad action is done out of ignorance rather than out of malice. Both of them seem to have a pretty optimistic view that if people actually know what the right thing to do is, they will do the right thing. And he also thinks that if you educate somebody, then somebody will mend their ways, because basically everybody is a good person. So he thinks that's good. He thinks that like Confucius, he thinks that the emperor should be in charge. He thinks that society should be run in the same way that Confucius thought it should be run. He definitely puts a lot of emphasis on rites and rituals in the same way that Confucius did. Maybe if he has a difference from Confucius, one of his big differences seems to be that he doesn't necessarily believe in all the kind of that all these spirits actually exist. He may not believe that there's anything supernatural. He may not believe even that the ancestors are really there, but he thinks you need to kind of go through the rituals just because it's good for society for people to be all doing the same thing. There's a kind of there's a harmony in society, and we should all kind of follow the rituals, basically, whether they are kind of philosophically or theologically justified. One of his kind of more sophisticated ideas is that there are 4 elements to human learning and human goodness. And he calls these the 4 sprouts. Obviously, sprouts grow. And so if you feed them, they will grow in the right way. He thinks in some ways the job of bringing up children is just to bring out their natural goodness. So he thinks it's natural for people to have compassion for others. So if you see somebody suffering, you will feel bad for them. You'll feel empathy. So that's the idea of understanding somebody and is understanding their emotions and caring about them. It's essentially to do with kindness. He also thinks that shame is a very natural emotion. And so if once somebody realizes they've done something wrong, they will feel shame and they will want to change themselves. They will want to repair the damage they've done. He thinks that there's a natural desire to apologize for what you've done, to try and make good on your mistakes and repair the damage that you've done. And he also thinks that we have a sort of natural sense of justice and will naturally approve of good actions and will naturally disapprove of bad actions. And that will lead to wisdom. So, I mean, we might see this as a fairly crude psychology, but it's an interesting division of people. One of his important parables was of Ox Mountain. It's a little quick, but it's sort of interesting. So the parable is like that there was originally a mountain. It was lush, lots of green on it. It looked beautiful, but then the humans on it and the animals on it, they kind of cut down all the trees. They had woodcutters. You had animals grazing, and all the green goes. So the timber harvesting and grazing causes erosion. In some ways, that's the parable. It seems a bit thin, but his basic idea is that the mountain is naturally green, but then if it is kind of comes across hostile conditions where people are kind of cutting down all the greenery, then it's going to suffer. So his basic idea is that humans are naturally good, but if they encounter bad conditions, then their character will be turned around. So he thinks that humans are naturally good, but sometimes due to negative influences, a lack of education, for example, then people turn bad. The characters will become worse. But it's also an optimistic idea in that It's possible to regrow trees and to regrow all the plants on the mountain. You just have to kind of be careful about it. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is possible to do. And in the same way, if somebody has become bad, by the appropriate care and looking after them and education, you can make them back into a good person. So you have this sort of fundamental optimistic view. So he's recognizing people's moral potential. He's recognizing the impact of people's environment. He thinks that empathy and rehabilitation are very valuable. So he thinks that we can make society better by treating people well. So in some ways, he sounds like a very optimistic person. And he thinks that if you treat people well, then they will respond well. So it's a nice view to have. That leads to his, he had this kind of view of differentiated love, which is like his view of morality that often gets kind of talked about. So basically the idea is, as we've seen with Confucius, the foundation of morality is family, your family relationships. And so you certainly care about your family. Mencius kind of certainly contrasted his view with the view of the Mohists, who said that you should love everybody equally and you should not favor your family. Mencius thought, well, that he thought that like loving everybody equally is a unrealistic approach. You can't love everybody in the world equally. It's natural to love your family. But he did favor a middle way where you love your family, but you also aim to love the rest of society well. So family love is like the foundation. Filial piety is really essential to that. But then you build on that love and you extend your love beyond your family to the rest of society. So that, in some ways, it's a pretty simple view, but it's a nice view. So there's this idea, you can talk about expanding circles of care. You can gradually expand your compassion from your family to other realms of society. So then you can extend it to your neighbors and all the rest of society. So he thinks that the kind of family love is the foundation, and as you extend your care, you'll start to care for the rest of society. And again, he seems like it's a pretty idealistic view, but it's a nice view to have. But as I said, that gets contrasted with Moses' idea of universal love, and it's a practical approach to doing morality. The final person we're going to talk about is Xunzi. And in some ways, Xunzi is a much more cynical thinker. And he is much more pessimistic about human nature. He's certainly a Confucian. He shares many elements of Confucian philosophy. But he disagrees with Mencius about human nature. There is a text called the Xunzi, which contains essays on ethics, education, governing, and ritual. So he wrote about a lot. And his writing is widely admired as being kind of clear and logical. And he ended up being very influential. So while Mencius says we're inherently good, Xunzi says we're inherently bad. He thinks basically humans are selfish. and we don't care about other people. So that's a very kind of simple, easy to understand contrast. Mencius says that people are good, they inherently care about other people. Xunzi says, no, they're not, people are just selfish. In some ways, both Mencius and Xunzi have sort of similar views of what society should be like. They both emphasize education. They think moral training is very important. They also think that rituals and leadership are very important. So, you know, even though they have fundamentally different views of human nature, they, to some extent, they agree on the kind of way society should be, but there is a strong difference on emphasis. So certainly, kind of Confucius had a fairly neutral view of human nature. Confucius didn't seem to kind of commit himself to saying whether humans are good or bad. He did think that the leaders could be the leaders of society, like the emperor, could be good role models. And he thought it was very important for there to be good role models in society. He also thought that education was extremely important. You know, all of them think that education is very important. All of them think that role models are important. All of them think that ritual is important, but there are some differences. Xunzi's view of education is that when you get a kid, this kid is basically selfish, maybe kind of antisocial, and education has to turn that kid around, has to make that kid a good kid. You have to make the kid care about others. And the way you do that is you need to overcome that kid's basic instincts through discipline and learning. So Xunzi is going to be more in favor of discipline. He certainly thinks you have to teach ethics and the classical texts. You need to teach the ritual practices, and he does think that it's possible to turn people around. So he's hopeful in the sense that he thinks with enough education, kids will become good members of society. He definitely thinks that ritual plays a big role in that. You have to reinforce the hierarchy, and you have to cultivate respect for authority, and you have to get people to be able to control their emotions. Let's think about the role of punishment and how Mencius and Xunzi have different views of punishment. So as we've seen, Mencius has a sort of very idealistic view that people are basically good, then have natural compassion, natural sense of righteousness. So the job of education is just to kind of let those sprouts grow. He does think that, yeah, there's a role for punishment in society. You have to have some sort of threat to make sure that people don't commit crimes, but he doesn't think that was really going to change people's moral character. He doesn't think punishment is actually going to make a big difference to who you are. It may change your behavior. He thinks really what you need is education and rulers who are inspiring their subjects through their own examples. So Mencius doesn't think you can coerce people to be good. Whereas Xunzi is like, you know, human nature is bad. So discipline and punishment are going to be totally appropriate. He's a much bigger defender of strict discipline and having laws and laws with punishments, and he thinks that's really essential to train people's moral character. He definitely thinks you need to have society with strong leadership, and he believes basically in like law and order. You know, like, he's a kind of old school. Punishing is good for them. So Mencius, this contrast is pretty straightforward. Mencius believes in goodness, and he thinks that goodness is innate, whereas Xunzi thinks that goodness has to be cultivated, and you have to change the kid around from being bad to being good. He thinks punishment, Xunzi thinks punishment is effective, whereas Mencius thinks it's ineffective. So Xunzi has a strong emphasis on authority and law. So Xunzi definitely has this definitely thinks society needs to have punishments. So Xunzi is much more happy to have an authoritarian regime. He believes in a powerful emperor who's going to have strict discipline, whereas Mencius thinks you have a powerful emperor, but who leads through example. So Mencius is far more optimistic about society. Xunzi has this kind of more pessimistic view, but he thinks that you can achieve an orderly society by lots of discipline. So when you look at Confucius's view of government, it seems to be somewhat closer to that of Mencius. Confucius, at least ideally, doesn't think we should use coercion. He thinks that rulers should lead by their example. And so he believes in hierarchy, but he believes that the hierarchy is for the benefit of the whole of society. He does not think that the emperor or those in charge should be being selfish. So Confucius is fairly sort of pragmatic. Maybe he'll allow some punishment if it's necessary, but he definitely thinks that it's important to for humans to make themselves better. So it seems that Confucius is not in favor of a rigid society, while Xunzi is pretty much in favor of a rigid society. Getting to the end now, Xunzi, in his kind of metaphysical views, he doesn't really seem to believe in heaven much, or if he believes there is a heaven, then he thinks those kind of ancestors aren't going to be interested in human life down here. They'll be focused on their own affairs. So he thinks that all these supernatural things, there's not much reason to really believe in them. He thinks that we have to kind of change society through our own effort. But he does believe in all the ritual just because he thinks it's good for people to have a sort of a rigid way of life, that it kind of helps them. So Confucius thinks that heaven is a moral guide. Confucius does think that there are these supernatural forces. He does think that there's a kind of sort of spiritual ethics and there is this real interference in human life from the ancestors. Whereas Xunzi is a more kind of, he's mainly focused on humans. He's not really focused on stuff going on supernaturally. Here are to finish off, here are some quotations from Xunzi. He says, human nature is evil and goodness is caused by intentional activity. So that's the idea that people are inherently bad, but you can turn them around by education and discipline. He thinks the way of learning is none other than to seek the lost mind. It's a little vague, but he certainly believes in some role for introspection and self-cultivation. And he thinks that we can find morality. We have these selfish desires, but we can find it by thinking carefully about morality in the world. And he thinks so true learning is going to transform your character. And finally, rites are means of regulating the emotions and harmonizing desires. So living a life full of ritual is a way for you to deal with all your selfish emotions. It's a way for you to kind of become a better person. You think there's this idea that rituals actually improve you, not because you have some contact with some supernatural realm, but just because like going through those that ritual process isn't somehow good for you in committing to the rules of society. It kind of keeps you in touch with community and tradition. In some ways, it's a very sort of it's a very conservative view. So that is Xunzi, and that's our presentation on those three Chinese philosophers.